Welcome to another episode of Creative Life with Julia Esch. Hi, I'm Julia. I'm an abstract artist and photographer, and on this podcast, I encourage you to live a life full of creativity and passion. Today, I want to talk about music, specifically about the role of music as fuel for other creative expressions, and I will talk about my history with music as well, my relationship with it, what impact it has had and still has on my visual art, and how it feeds into my art process. So my relationship with music started out quite early. I grew up surrounded by music, even though my parents aren't musicians, but my dad was very enthusiastic about bands like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Black Sabbath. So we're talking early 90s here. I was born 1993, and my mom, being a very 80s passionate person, she listened to a lot of the stuff that was spun on the radio all the time. And there are still somewhere videos in our archives where I would have my little concerts and dance performances on a little chair with my plastic microphone. I would get on there. I was 4 years old, and would just have my best time, imagining that I'm having a full blown show there. So my memory reaches quite far. So I do even have like some glimpses of the thoughts that I sometimes had around this. So that's quite funny. But I do remember that when I was 5 years old, I believe, for the first time, I saw the video for Lenny Kravitz's Fly Away, and that song back then already, it evoked like a very special atmosphere and feeling in me, and I really fell in love with the video and just everything about that song. And to this day, it still has that effect on me. So I do have a kind of special relationship with that piece in that video. And that leads me, I think, to the very first point about music. I feel if I personally compare music to visual art, it just feels a little bit more straight to the nerve, straight to the heart, straight to the emotion. To me, it feels like our system just still needs a second more to process visual information when music already, like, it already gives you the goosebumps, or it already makes you feel a certain way, or you just know, is this the track that is now the right choice for what you want to feel like, what you want to surround yourself or fill yourself with. Like, is it just hitting your vibe on the spot, or isn't it? I feel with music this happens very, very quickly and very, like, instantly. So for me, music has always had a very expressive and very intense character. And another key thing to me is that since I've been able to think, I've always had some sort of noise or melody playing in my mind. I think the best comparison is if you watch a movie, there's always a soundtrack in the back, right? So, especially when there are significant things happening, or if you want to emphasize something in the dramaturgy of a movie, you you utilize music. And to me, this is what my head has always felt like. There's always been some noise, some melody, something playing, something popping up when something happens, when I feel a certain way. It would always cause like a little audio reaction somewhere. And it would either be something that I know, a song that I know, or it would be something that just comes out of my mind. And to me, this is, I think, one of the reasons why I do attach a lot of memory and emotion to music. And it can, to me, sometimes act like a button to jump back in time. I believe it's even scientifically quite backed up that smell is what takes you back to a place or to a memory, a feeling most intensively. And I also share that experience. For me, I, like a very random fact is that I do still keep some of the fragrance bottles that I used to have many, many years ago, because I know if I even just like smell on the cap a bit, it would instantly take me back to that moment when I was into that fragrance and wearing it. So it's a similar process to me with certain songs or albums. And I think that's also a fairly shared experience, that there are some songs and some albums that I will not avoid at all cost, but that definitely do have a particular attachment for me, and where I just know that if I listen to that, it will take me back to a place, it will take me back to a state where I've been. And the interesting thing is you can also utilize it. You can utilize it, and that is now tying into the art process and the visual process a bit. Because what I do very often, I will try to create a particular atmosphere in myself and in my headspace through music. And because I do have a quite broad collection of different attachments and different associations, I can play with that library a lot, I'd say. But there has always been a very interesting connection and link in my head that I not so long ago recognized consciously. And it only happened because I was talking to people about my work process a little bit more, and people were asking questions. And then I started to think and to ask myself some questions. One of those being, if I do have a particular idea in mind when I start a painting, or if I do already have a finished product in mind. That's a question that I got asked fairly often during, let's say, the past 3 years. And the truth is that very often I will listen to music and I will have kind of a movie unfolding in my head. I and now to put it into context, I 80% of the time when I paint, I or draw or create, also when I make my costumes and my photo setups and all that, and when I shoot, I listen to music. And sometimes it is just background noise, but that is fairly rare. I usually make quite conscious choices about what I want to listen to, what I want to kind of wire myself into, what I want to loop myself into. And I utilize that a lot actually in my work process. And if I listen to a song, I will usually have like a movie unfold, some scenes, motion, landscapes, characters. Sometimes it will be just textures. Sometimes it's just the texture of something organic, of flesh, of tissue, of something breaking, of something being torn, of something growing together or being cut open, or like the range is very broad actually. It's not just the macabre stuff or the dark stuff that emerges there. There's many different visuals, and a lot of that feels very very intuitive, very out of conscious control. And because I have been quite deeply interested in immersing myself into symbolism from also quite early age, I always try to kind of translate what I see and what I experience visually when I listen to something, and to understand what I'm actually trying to convey there. What is my mind creating actually? What is it maybe trying to say? What is it trying to put into these images and into these things that I get displayed? And I already feel this episode is probably going to be quite chaotic. But we'll see how it goes. I mean, to be honest, this is what very often my thought and work process in art might seem looking from the outside. I think to somebody on the outside, it sometimes might look very impulsive and very jumpy and very unpredictable. While in fact there is a system to it, but it's a system that is hard to put into boxes and hard to explain. But there is a pattern or different patterns. It's very adaptable. And the thing is, when I do have these visuals and these things floating in my mind, it's a back and forth process of kind of deciphering what it is and what I can put it into. And then again, once I start putting it into physical form, that again feeds back into this loop. And it's kind of, at some point, I just feel like an amplifier or a transistor to these things. And this is why I incredibly enjoy that process of finding music, finding audio art that is stimulating that part in me. I really love that, and it is, to me, a very unique process, and there is nothing much alike that I have felt or encountered. What I want to create is also more of an experience. It's something that, again, starts a process in someone else, in their mind. It makes them feel and visualize things. So I kind of wanted to pass on that thing that was evoked in me, that emotion, that cluster of different reactions. I wanted to convey that into a visual way and pass that on. But now that I'm explaining it, it sounds very conscious, it sounds very clear and very tangible, while actually that process doesn't feel like that at all. As I said, very often I will feel just like a vessel where all of this flows into, and then it gets transformed and alchemized into something visual, and that's what I produce then. And that's my relationship, I'd say, when it comes to music feeding into my visual. I do have another side, though, that feels quite strongly about expressing myself in music as well, and vocally as well. So that is another side of the story. And actually, my first encounter with that part was, I think, when I was 10 or 11 years old. I actually got a bamboo flute. So my dad brought it because he saw it somewhere at a store for like a cheap price. And I was very much into audiobooks as a kid. So I really, really loved listening to them. And usually I would have my tape cassette recorder and put my tape cassettes there. And I loved a lot of the music that was also put in there. So again, it's using music to emphasize the story and the dramaturgy, and I was really into that. And then me and my flute and my cassette recorder, I started learning to play some of the intros that I liked in some audiobooks. And I learned all of that by just listening to the melody and then trying to replay it on the flute in an apartment, with my parents being on the other side of the wall. So, needless to say that now looking back at it, I admire the patience that they have displayed. But actually it worked. It worked, and quite fast I was able to play my favorite soundtracks from my favorite audiobooks on a flute. So that was my first experience with making music. And I'm sure that there has been something else, like playing the xylophone in the kindergarten or something, but I don't remember that. And yeah, so my first conscious experience that I do remember and I do feel is my initiation into the world of music is the flute playing. So, and this was around the time when I also started going to school. So, just for context, up to that age, my parents had homeschooled me because we were moving places a lot, not really voluntarily, but we were moving a lot, and that was one of the reasons why they needed to lay my foundation for future education and knowledge, and they did an amazing job at that. But yeah, so at the age of 10 and a half, 11, something along these lines, I entered school, and I grew up in Latvia, so I also graduated high school there. And in Latvia, it's quite traditional that you actually choose either going to the choir to sing or you go folk dancing. So it's one of those. You have to choose. Your parents have to choose whatever. But I ended up joining the school choir, and that was where I think I received my first proper training in breathing, like just the foundations. I didn't have any individual trainings, individual lessons, whatever. But I guess that singing in the choir, it laid some good foundations, and that was my entry point to getting a more theoretical understanding of music. Very rudimental, very basic, but I got a basic understanding of how music is structured, music theory, of timing and whatnot, and just reading notes. And so it's just some very, very, very basic music theory. And then quite soon after that, if 2 or 3 years went by, and then I started discovering music that I liked. And it all came along with us finally having a computer at home and unlimited internet access. And to me, it meant that an entirely new world of discovering different bands, different artists, watching music videos, like all of that flew into me at once. And I quite quickly dived into the heavy end of music. So I discovered Slipknot, which was life changing for me. So I definitely can divide my life into before and after Slipknot. So, or before and after discovering them and their music. So I listened to them a lot. I really like Linkin Park as well. So I would say that Chester Bennington and his vocals and Linkin Park's lyrics also left a huge imprint on my journey. And to me, especially Meteora is an album that has aged incredibly well. I still love listening to it. And also Chris Cornell was very, very high on the top of my list. I listened to his stuff a lot. And very quickly I fell I fell in love with so many different artists, and I felt so seen and so heard. And I was like, this is the thing that I couldn't put my finger on, and now I see it, I feel it, I find it, and I soaked it in like fully. And back then I was also listening to Metallica a lot, and that was my entry point actually to my heavy vocals, because I was listening to numerous things. Like, I discovered one thing after another. I was really having the time of my life, just like embracing all that new universe for myself. And it was also when I produced a lot of art inspired by that, many drawings. I was more into drawing and into ink back then than into painting, even though I was starting to get a feel for working with textures, and like I got a hint that I might like that a lot. But I wasn't there yet. I was still very focused on drawing and like getting the foundations right for some of the things that I was trying to do. And I was also going to art school back then. It was a sort of additional education to school education. After the school classes, you would 2 times a week and then on Saturdays as well go to the art school and learn different techniques there, just foundations in art history, in painting, in ceramics, in different mixed techniques. So we actually did have a subject which was dedicated just to exploring different materials and doing stuff with that. So it was actually a very good start and very good foundation for a lot of the things that I also do now. So I definitely see how that fed into me entering the career and building my career path the way I did now. But back to the initial topic. So at that time, I'm listening to a lot of new stuff, discovering all the heavy stuff for myself. Avenged Sevenfold, by the way, as well. I really was into their stuff back then, and I'd say not all of the music resonates with me the way it did back then, but there are still some songs and some pieces that I really like and that really have stuck with me still, and that I still put on and I really enjoy it. Looking back at it, it was a very exciting time on one hand. On the other hand, there were reasons why I was yearning so much for that feeling to be heard and to be seen and to be understood, and for someone express all the things that I wasn't able to say, or when I was, I felt like nobody's listening. And funnily enough, Linkin Park has a song with that title, right? So it was a very mixed time for me. It was a very mixed time, but also a time where I had my entry into heavy vocals, and it actually happened quite experimentally because I was listening to Metallica a lot back then as well, and I had my tape cassette recorder. So at some point, I felt like covering some of the songs. I wanted to sing the same way that James does, and not the exact same way, but in that manner. I really liked that, and I felt like I could pull that off. I could, and I remember then at some point I also got a really wacky, cheap Western acoustic guitar. That was all I had. That was the best that I could work with. My tape cassette recorder, my Western guitar, and my clueless, untrained, and not appropriately warmed up or anything vocal cords. So I just tried to create the sound that I heard and to record it and then to play it and then to see how similar it was. And this is how I kind of self-taught and experimented my way into the vocals that I developed later on further and further. But talking about music being fuel for creative expression, now from a less personal perspective, I think that it can be incredibly powerful to just put yourself in different states of mind and into different headspaces. And that can be incredibly beneficial when you're not just creating things, not if you are even somebody who is creating for a living or focusing their life especially around creativity. I think even if you're just an individual who's into exploring yourself a little bit deeper and a little bit more, I think exposing yourself to different kinds of music, to different kinds of aesthetics that come along with music very often, through the music videos, through the visuals, through the costumes, through the shows that artists put together. I think that can be an incredible pool for self exploration, for inspiration, for engaging in creativity, even when you are not in the active creating role. So I believe that while everybody can benefit from that side of music being fuel and being source of something, I think especially in creative work, music can be really powerful to lay the foundations for a space where you can create something out of your own universe. It feels like what you feed into your vessel and into your system. It's really interesting what it turns into. And back again to that alchemizing process that I tried to describe before, that I have observed happening in me. I think that is a very powerful source to see your creative universe from a different perspective, and to blend your universe with somebody else's universe. I think that is a very, very, very powerful to do. That is a very exciting journey to embark on. And most of all, it is amazing to do so when you can engage with an artist directly. At the same time, you do have the opportunity, just by listening to their piece of work and letting that feed into your creative algorithm, you already are kind of planting their seed into your world and growing something new out of that. And I find something incredibly inspiring and interesting in that. Something very unique and yet so simple. And I think I had, for a long time, not really noticed this consciously and not seen it in a very systematic way. But once I started doing that, once I started embracing it a little bit more from a practical perspective as well, I feel that is where my work also got elevated on a different level. Because again, returning to the idea of creating something that is not just your outlet, but it will serve somebody else in a way it served you, and it will ignite something in them. I feel like that is exactly what is happening when you take that fuel and then your system and your mechanism creates something new out of it. And then it's kind of, you pass it on. It's kind of a flame that you pass on. It's a torch that lights the fire of the next one. And somehow, while all of this thing at the moment feels a little bit messy, this entire episode feels like it's all over the place, at least from my perspective right now. But I do feel that this is a beautiful connection and maybe a beautiful closing point, that way of kind of passing the torch and passing on the seed in a way that also creates a community. It creates a community and it creates a connection that is individual to everyone who shares it, but from a bigger perspective, from a higher point of view, it is a collective experience and it creates a community. And again, it all goes back to connection, and that connection can happen in very different ways, and that we can find like-mindedness and that connection in very different shapes and forms and places. And I think that is actually a beautiful closing point for this. Because in the end, I think music has the power to connect people on a very on a very authentic and on a very emotional level. regardless on what side of the spectrum. And I would like to close this episode again with a tarot card. And let's see what message. Whoop. Wow, that was a lot. But we do have the Page of Wands here. So the Page of Wands is a very interesting card. Last time we actually had the Page of Swords, I believe. Very interesting. So the Page of Wands, again, the pages in the tarot suit are actually describing junior people, people both young in age, literally, but also people who are at the beginning of a journey or at the beginning of an evolution. And quick disclaimer in between, if you're not into that type of stuff, try to take it as a psychological exercise or as a positive affirmation maybe. But the Page of Wands usually talks about new beginnings, exciting new beginnings, also curiosity, and curiosity not just in a shy way, but in a hands-on way, in a way of somebody who likes to initiate things, to approach things from a practical perspective and not wait around too long. Sometimes the Page of Wands can struggle to push through with something and stick to it to the very end, because they can get excited and they can also get excited over something new quite quickly. But besides that, it's a very optimistic and very energetic character with a lot of potential that comes in, embracing new beginnings, new adventures, new skills, but new passions as well. Not just skills, not just an occupation, but something that is that you're really passionate about, that really ignites that in you. And just a little reminder that the Page of Wands sometimes needs, though, is that results actually will come with a bit of responsibility and a bit of discipline, but usually the passion part is what will help this character to stick through some of the difficulties as well, and to keep their motivation and to keep their focus. So I think that's a very beautiful and optimistic message, and one that we all can embrace and take away with us. So thank you for tuning in. And if you like this episode, hit the subscribe button. You can also follow me on Instagram. You can see all my art there in full format as well on my feed. And see you in another episode. Bye.